Hello guys. Today we're going to be taking a look at the element of value. Oh, before we do that, we need some lights. What is value? Value is the effect that light has on the surface of an object. So let me go ahead and turn on some lights so we can actually see what we're doing. Alright, that's a lot better. Okay, so the element of value is nothing more than how the light affects the surface of an object. You know, where the shadows are going to be, where the highlights are going to be, where the midtones are going to be. All of that is dictated by the light. You can have a single light source, you can have multiple light sources, as you saw in the example. It's also affected by how strong the light is, how close the light is to the object. Value is an important element when we're trying to make things look more three-dimensional. It helps us add form and mass to whatever it is that we're drawing. Virtually everything that we see in the real world is three-dimensional, right? And so when we look at an object, whether you're drawing something like this or whether you're looking at a car or something big, it's being affected by the light. The colors are being affected by the light, the shadows are being affected by the light, the textures are being affected by the light, and so forth and so on. And that's really what value is all about. How is the light affecting the surface of the object? So what I want to do in this video is I want to kind of demonstrate some of the different effects and some terminology that we need to know before we actually start applying it to our work. So let me switch camera angles and then we'll get right to it. So I mentioned in the intro that the intensity and the direction of the light has a bearing on the surface. That's what value is really all about. So let's start off with a very simple light source so that you can see what I mean. If I have this little light source right here and it's off top right, then you can see that on this side there is a little bit of a highlight. On the opposite side there's a shadow. There is a midtones in between where the highlight and the shadow go. And then behind there, you can actually see the cast shadows. If I move the light, so the location of the light, then you can see how all of that is affected. So if I move the light source to the top left, everything changes. The highlight changes, the core shadow changes, the cast shadow changes, all of it changes. So that is location. If I move it down, you can actually see the highlight on the right, shadows on the left, and look at the cast shadow. It's gone up, right? If I move this up, then the cast shadow goes down. So that's an indication of how the light is affecting the surface of the object. So now let's take a look at intensity of the light. So I went to a little bit stronger light source and I put it up a little higher, and you can see that the highlights are much more clear to see, but the shadows appear to be softer. And the reason for that is because the light is strong enough where it's actually getting and bouncing off the background. So now if we did more than one light source, it will change once again. So if you look at the highlights here, and then let's take a look at it when I change when I add a second light source. Now we can see that the entire object has become more uniform. And when you look at the cast shadows, there's actually two cast shadows. One is going diagonally to the left, and the other one is going diagonally to the right. The shadows, the core shadows on the object itself are not as noticeable because the two lights are basically canceling each other out. So you have lots of nice highlights, but not as many deep shadows. So when you are working with values, you have to pay attention to the light source, how many light source, how strong it is, the direction, and so forth and so on. The surface of the object will also affect how the light or how the values change. So in this case, we're looking at a cardboard box and it's very flat. So a lot of the light gets absorbed. It doesn't bounce. Here I'm using a single light source on the top right, and you can clearly see all of the highlights on this side. This edge where the box bends is the brightest point. And then we can see the shadow on this side, and we can see the cast shadow going in the opposite direction. If the object, however, was transparent, like this glass here, then you're going to have the light doing all kinds of stuff. The values are, in some areas, the light's going to go through the glass. In other parts, the air is going to bounce off the glass. So you can actually see some really, really bright areas. You can see some very soft gradation. And if you could see the cast shadows, there's actually light in the cast shadows. And that's because the light is actually, in some areas, the light is going through the glass, not in all areas. If the object is round, like the sphere, then you're going to notice that the highlights and the shadows do more of a gradation. There's not a distinct spot where the shadows are going to begin. So you have more of a gradient value. So here's our highlight area, and as it comes down this way, it gets darker. And the shadow, the core shadow, the cast shadow, is more of an oval. Regardless of the color of the object you're looking at, that object will be affected by the light. So in the sphere, we can actually see that the highlight is near the top left, where the core shadow is near the bottom right. Now, if I were to move this light source, I can actually change where the highlights and the shadows are going to be. So by moving the light source down, you can see that the highlight also moved down, and the core shadows are almost directly behind the ball. Cast shadow is going back and to the right. If you have multiple objects in the same scene, you'll notice here in this case that the sphere, the cast shadow is going to be on the box, and the box is going to have its own light, its own midtones, and you can't really see, well actually you can see the cast shadow on the box. It's going to the right, but the cast shadow for the sphere, instead of being on the blanket, now that cast shadow is actually on the box. So if you have a complex object, a complex form like this one, like Frank, you have to treat each part of the object separately. So here I changed the light source to above, way above and to the right, and you can see that this area right here now is the highlight. This area becomes a shadow, but then this shoulder and this part of the chest is facing upward, so it's going to get highlighted again, and then there's going to be a shadow here, and there's a deep, deep shadow here, because all of this is blocking that. So here's a cast shadow here, and then you can see another cast shadow right here. As the arm comes out away from the face, it gets lighter again, okay? And we can see a little bit of the shadow on that side. Same thing with the legs. The legs overall look darker than here because since the light source is coming from the top, not as much light is going to get down to the legs except for the feet. If I move the object, right, because sometimes you're not moving, sometimes the light source is not moving, sometimes the object itself is moving. So let's say that I move the character. So now, all of a sudden you can see how the light affects different parts of the body. Still the same light source. So this upper area is the brightest area. This area here we can see it's starting to get darker, and then there's a cast shadow here. This sticks out a little bit more than when we had the other view. So this area gets a little bit more light, but then you have these cast shadows here. And this leg, because it comes out this way, looks a little bit brighter than that one. There is a little bit of a reflective light being caused by the metal plate that he's on. All of these things that I mentioned fall into the category of value, and they're all being affected by the light. So let's change the light source and let's see what happens. Okay, so I didn't take away the first light source, I just added a second stronger light source so that you can see the effect. And then if I put all three lights on, then you can see how much brighter the overall character got. And the shadows are all but gone. There's just a few cast shadows that we can still see, but most of the shadows are being canceled out by the other lights. So on an object like this, the light is going to be doing all kinds of weird stuff because everything has to be treated individually. Here we have the light source coming from top right, and you can see clearly some highlight areas. Each one of these things has its own little highlights. Now, most of them are located right in this area right here. and they get a little bit darker as they go down. Okay, but the light is also getting through some of these. So the ribs that are on the other side, you can see them, but they're not nearly as bright as the ones that are on this side. And if you look carefully at the cast shadow, the cast shadow is actually going to have a little bit of light on it as well, because the light is getting through and it's creating light within the cast shadows. So all of these little things is what you have to worry about when you work with the element of value. Now the best way to work with the element of value is in black and white until you get the hang of it. It's just easier to learn by working with just black and white. But value also works with color. So once you understand how value works in black and white, then you can apply the same concepts to your color drawings. So there you have a brief overview of the element of value. What I would recommend is that when you are practicing working with this element, practice both from real objects and practice from your imagination. When you practice from real objects, make sure that you pay close attention to the highlights, the core shadows, the midtones, and the cast shadows. See what they're actually doing. The better that you get to know that when you're looking at something real, the easier it becomes to do things when you are doing it from your imagination. So that'll do it for this video. I'm going to leave you with a little value drawing. In the next video, we're going to get into gradation, value scales, and how to create contrast with value. And then thereafter, the videos, will actually use them in real applications. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe, share, hit the bell, and I'll see you on the next one.